Hello students, today we will be discussing the topic Autonomy Movements in India with reference to the Bodo Homeland Movement and the Gorkhaland Movement. The objective for today's discussion is to give you an understanding and insight into the nature of autonomy movements in India, the nature of the Bodo Homeland Movement as well as the dynamics of the Gorkhaland Movement. For the convenience of understanding, I have divided the entire discussion into a number of segments. We would first focus on the nature of autonomy movements in India. Then we would try to understand the genesis and dynamics of the Bodo Homeland Movement, the government response to the Bodo demands, and then we would move on to the Gorkhaland Movement, the demands of the Gorkhas and the government response towards accommodation of the demands, as well as the two territorial institutions that has been working in Gorkhaland, that is the Darjeeling Gorkha Hill Council and after that the Gorkhaland Territorial Administration. This is the broad purview of today's discussion. Let us start with what are autonomy movements and why do they occur. Autonomy movements refers to self-determination movements by people of a particular region or regions demanding a right to recognize their distinct identity and culture. Their autonomy is sought in multiple spheres. It might be political, cultural, economic. It usually stems from a sense of deprivation, marginalization and underdevelopment of the region. In a federation, such claims for autonomy may take the form of statehood, sub-statehood, autonomous district councils and the like. In the Indian context, autonomy movements refers to rearrangement of federal relations between the region and the state. The supporters of autonomy generally allege that their region has become an internal colony of the developed regions. Their natural resources are exploited by outsiders and they are not paid back the loyalty or resources that are due to them. Their region is also not given adequate representation in the political institutions in the state and decisions about them are taken by the government without their concurrence. Their language and culture are also not given due recognition and many a time the dominant language is imposed upon them. Let us try to understand these issues with reference to the Bodo Homeland Movement first. The question automatically arises, who are the Bodos, where do they live and why did they start a separate autonomy movement? The Bodos also are referred to as the Kacharis in the pre-colonial historiography of Assam, are considered to be the aborigines of the Brahmaputra Valley. The Bodos are a Tibeto-Burman speaking Indo-Mongoloid ethnic group. In the present times, the Bodos are considered to be the largest praying tribes of Assam who inhabit the northern areas of Brahmaputra Valley, namely in places like Kokrajhar, Udalguri, Chirang, Baksha, Darang, Sonitpur, Kamrup, Nalbari, Barpeta, Dhubri, among a few other places. Now, the Bodos have started a movement to recognize their identity since the post-independence period. Now, in the post-independence period, students, we have already studied the different ethnic groups within the administrative domain of Assam began voicing their aspirations for self-determination that ranged from the demand for autonomy within the Indian Union to complete independence. To cater to different regional and tribal aspirations, the state of Nagaland, Meghalaya, Mizoram were carved out of Assam. The 6th schedule granted autonomy to the tribals of Meghalaya, Mizoram, Tripura. Now, while special protection was given to some tribes living in northeast, especially Assam, the Bodos who lived in the plain of Assam did not gain anything despite being a distinct ethnic community. In the post-independence period, the construction of a separate Bodo identity coincided with the linguistic movement and the Bodo Sahitya Sabha was born, which spearheaded a cultural movement for the protection of the Bodo language. Till 1967, the Bodo movement was completely peaceful and they used democratic methods in order to create Bodo consciousness catering to the twin concerns of language and script. Later, Indira Gandhi, the then Prime Minister of India, proclaimed in 1967 that Assam would be reorganized on the basis of a federal structure. This encouraged the Bodos, who started a movement for self-rule or autonomy in the same year. The reorganization of states in the northeast in 1972 saw reorganization of Assam and the provision of separate autonomy for the Mizos and the Khasis, upgradation of Manipur and Tripura to full statehood. This frustrated the Bodos, who felt that they are left out from their demands of autonomy and being recognized by the government. The Bodos now shifted gears. The erstwhile cultural autonomy demand gave way to demand for the creation of an autonomous region called Udayachal by the Plains Tribal Council of Assam. It is during this period that the Bodo movement assumed a change of guard, with the leadership passing off to the dynamic All Bodo Students Union ABSU, which shed off the earlier democratic tactics and adopted a militant stance to pursue the goal of a separate state of Bodoland and conferment of 6 scheduled status to the Bodo Kacharis of Karbi Anglong. The subsequent years saw Assam rocked in bunds, assassination, violence, blockades, abduction and inhuman violence. Now, what was the reasons for this Bodo homeland demand? Students, there could be 3 basic reasons behind the grievances of the Bodos and their demand for a separate recognition. The first reason, economic reasons. More than 90% of the Bodos depended on agriculture as the principal source of livelihood. But due to indebtedness, poverty, various state restructuring, internal and external migration, 70% of them are landless. Added to these were different settlement policies of the Assam government, which compelled the Bodos to shift to the remote forest areas. In the struggle of land, the tribals have not been able to really play a very prominent role, and they have been edged out by the non-tribal Assamese, but also by the Hindu and Muslim settlers as well as the Nepalis. In the tribal blocks and belts, tribal land has for generations been usurped by the rich landowners as well as the money lenders. The Bodos also resented the lack of proper employment opportunities for them within the state and resented the policies of the government of Assam. Various schemes and programs for the development of the tribals, like the Tribal Sub-Plan, Tribal Development Corporation, Tribal Development Authority, Integrated Tribal Development Project, Welfare of Scheduled Tribes, Backward Classes, failed to alleviate the condition of the Bodos. The second reason for their demand of a separate autonomous state was the question of language and identity. The Bodos, since independence, considered themselves to be an independent linguistic community, but the 1960 Act of the Assam government making Assamese the official language of the state alienated the Bodos. What added fuel to the fire was the education policy of the Assamese government, which alienated the Bodos further. What was this policy? The education policy aimed at popularization of Assamese, though Assamese was spoken by only 59% of the population, and imposition of the same on the non-Assamia population. For instance, on 28 February 1986, the Secondary Education Board of Assam, through a circular, introduced Assamia as a compulsory third language for the non-Assamia medium students in secondary schools. What was the implication? It meant that a Bodo student had to learn 4 languages instead of 3. The Assam government, by a notification, directed to the several government departments to provide jobs only to those who are proficient in the Assamese language. This infuriated the Bodos, whose language was under danger. The third reason behind the Bodoland movement was political. The reorganization of territories by the central government and the different modes of self-government given to the different cultural identities from time to time made the Bodos conscious of the need for protection of their own identity. A number of accords were signed by the Government of India with the northeast tribal communities. For example, with the Mizo National Front of Mizoram in 1986, with the insurgent Tripura National Volunteers in 1988, and above all, the signing of the Darjeeling Gorkha Hill Council Pact with the Gorkha National Liberation Front of West Bengal in 1988 increased the hopes and aspirations of the Bodos for a separate state of Bodoland. Now, these were the demands and the nature of the Bodo movement. What was the government response to the Bodos? Concerned over the growing unrest, the central government appointed a 3-member committee under the chairmanship of Bhupinder Singh in 1991, and this committee was entrusted with the responsibility of identifying the areas of the Bodos and other plains tribes north of the Brahmaputra and make recommendation as to the legislative, executive and administrative powers that could be accorded to these areas. The committee endorsed the fact that the Assamese society being essentially multiracial, multi-ethnic, multilingual, multi-religious, special measures should be taken to maintain the distinctiveness of the diverse entities. Based on the recommendations of the Bhupinder Singh committee, the government tried to accommodate the grievances of the Bodos. Now, in order to end militancy in the region, the government has signed 3 peace accords so far. The first accord in 1993, the second accord in 2003 and the third accord in January 2020. Let us try to understand about these 3 accords and whether these accords have been able to pacify the Bodos. The Bodo Accord of 1993. The Bodo Accord was a tripartite accord signed between the central government, the Assam government as well as the Bodo leadership represented by the All Bodo Students Union and the Bodo People's Union Committee. Through this accord, the Bodoland Autonomous Council or BAC was formed. The objective of Bodoland Autonomous Council was to accord recognition and autonomy through an administrative arrangement designed to further social, economic, educational and cultural advancement within a democratic framework. Secondly, the accord further provided that steps would be taken to protect the demographic complexity of the region falling within its jurisdiction. Thirdly, use of Bodo language as a medium of official correspondence within the BAC area. Now, what are these areas which would come within the territorial boundaries of the Bodoland district? The 4 districts of Assam's northeast constitute the Bodo autonomous districts. They are Kokrajhar, Chirang, Udalguri and Baksha. According to the 2011 census, the percentage of ST population, I mean the Bodos, are in Kokrajhar is about 31.4%, in Chirang 37.1%, in Udalguri 32.1% and in Baksha 34.8% population, which means there a substantial amount of other people, other communities also reside in the area. According to available data, the remaining percentage, that is around 65% of the population, comprise of Muslims, Adivasis, Koch Rajvanshis and people of other non-Bodo communities. Now, let us try to understand what happened after the Bodo Accord of 1993. The Bodo Accord of 1993 failed to pacify the Bodos because the accord never really took off. The accord was made under the state law and over-domination of the state of Assam continued over the Bodos. Moreover, the accord only provided a lip service in the name of autonomy. Nothing really happened because they found that the Bodos were not given considerable legislative or executive powers. Frustrated with the failure of the 1993 accord, the Bodo leaders started demanding afresh the formation of a separate state of Bodoland. after repeated talks and intense militancy, it was decided that a new political structure will be provided in the form of Bodoland Territorial Council BTC, which would be given a special status under the 6th schedule of the Constitution. The Bodo Accord of 2003 provided for an institutional structure called the Bodoland Territorial Council. The accord was more empowering than the 1993 accord, specifically because it was inserted under the 6th schedule of the Constitution. Let us try to understand what did the 2003 accord provide for. The 2003 accord provided that an autonomous self-governing body known as BTC, Bodoland Territorial Council, will be created. Constitutional protection will be given to this autonomous body under the 6th schedule. To fulfill the educational, economic, linguistic aspiration and the protection of land rights, socio-cultural and ethnic identity of the Bodos would be preserved. Non-tribals will definitely not be disadvantaged in relations to the rights enjoyed by them, and their rights and privileges will also be safeguarded. Settlement rights, inheritance rights, property rights will also be protected. And finally, inclusion of Bodo language in the Devanagari script in the 8th schedule of the Constitution was also protected. Based on this, the 100th Constitution Amendment Act was passed in 2003, where the Bodo language got constitutional recognition and was placed in the 8th schedule of the Constitution. Now, it's very interesting to note how the Bodos were accommodated in the BTC. Clause 4.2 of the accord provides that there would be 46 seats in the Bodo Territorial Council. Out of these 46 seats, 30 seats would be reserved for the scheduled tribes, and here please understand these scheduled tribes are the Bodos. 5 would be for non-tribal communities, 5 will be open to all communities. So, this makes it 40. Remaining 6 seats will be nominated by the governor of the state of Assam from unrepresented communities. Of these, 2 should be specifically to women members. Now, the Bodo Accord of 2003 also failed to pacify the Bodos, and the region saw massive violence, displacement, massacre, inhuman violence, and the region passed into bouts of law and order problem since 2003. However, it should also be noted that the Bodoland Territorial Council regularly organized elections in 2005 onwards. In these elections, democracy and universal adult suffrage were the governing principles. Nevertheless, in order to further pacify the Bodos, very recently in January 2020, the 3rd Bodo Accord was signed, which was called the Memorandum of Understanding of the Bodo Territorial Region 2020. The 3rd Bodo Accord was signed by the Union Government, Government of Assam, and very interestingly, 4 factions of the National Democratic Front of Bodoland. Now, this was a tripartite accord aimed at quelling the Bodo homeland demand and curb violence in the area. The region also found that the autonomy arrangements were further strengthened under the 2020 accord in the sense that it provided for greater economic benefits, cultural benefits and political benefits to the region. The number of seats was also increased to 60 in the Bodo Territorial Council. In a bid to expand the territorial boundaries of the Bodo Territorial Region, the accord stipulates that a commission will be set up to explore the possibility of extending the territorial extent of BTC to villages with more than 50% of Bodo population, while excluding those with less than 50% Bodo population. The existing Bodoland Territorial Council will be renamed as Bodoland Territorial Region. Now, this was about the Bodo movement and how the government has tried to accommodate the aspirations and demands of the Bodos through different ethnic accords. Let us come, students, to a different movement now, the Gorkhaland movement, going on for quite some time in the northern part of the state of West Bengal. Now, the Gorkhaland movement had a journey which started in the British period. Darjeeling, we know, was the summer retreat of the British government. Historical evidence suggests that before 1835, Darjeeling was a part of the kingdom of Sikkim, while Kalimpong and the adjoining territories were a part of Bhutan. In 1835, Darjeeling was relinquished to the British East India Company by the King of Sikkim. Two further expeditions in 1850 and 1861 confirmed British possession of Darjeeling. In the year 1865, the Anglo-Bhutanese War led to the acquisition of Kalimpong and territories to the east of the Teesta River. Darjeeling developed as a varied mix of Bhutanese, Nepalese people and people from Sikkim and the plains. The district remained a non-regulated scheme of administration till the passing of the Indian Councils Act of 1861, and later on the distinction between regulated and non-regulated districts were abolished by the British government. In the year 1870, Darjeeling was declared a scheduled district and it continued like that till 1919. The Government of India Act 1935 changed the status of Darjeeling to a partially excluded area within the province of Bengal. Thus, we find that the province of Darjeeling has been subjected to multiple experiments of autonomy, but this did not portray a response to the concerns of the identities living in Darjeeling. The British government cultivated the seeds of difference, playing with the Gorkha sentiments of attachment to a geographical territory, cascading into the demand for a separate state as early as 1907, when a memorandum was presented to the British government by the Hillmen's Association, who demanded that a separate administrative unit of Darjeeling and the Duars portion of Jalpaiguri be created. The grounds were geographical, racial, historical, religious and linguistic. To pursue their demands in an organized fashion and to provide a political platform to their demands, the All India Gorkha League was formed in 1923. Through the appeal of the Hillmen's Association for creating a separate administrative unit was not immediately realized. However, their repeated demands for separation from Bengal sowed the seeds for a cleavage between the Nepalis in the hill subdivisions in Darjeeling and the inhabitants of Bengal in the other region. The second type of demand for autonomy was formulated by the educated Nepali middle class of Darjeeling, who submitted a separate memorandum to the British government demanding for regional autonomy of Darjeeling. Nothing really happened. In the post-independence period, the movement gathered momentum when the States Reorganization Commission failed to recognize the autonomy of the Gorkhas. Highly disappointed, the Gorkhas asserted that post-independence period Gorkhas are the only community in the northeast who have been left out during the reorganization of states, even though they fulfilled the criterion of a linguistic group. Both the colonial government and the independent state failed to solve the aspirations and the frustration of the Gorkhas. The succeeding years witnessed massive movements for recognition of Nepali language in the 8th schedule of the Indian Constitution, as well as for autonomous status of Darjeeling within the province of West Bengal. In order to realize this aspiration, the government of West Bengal passed the Official Language Act in 1961 to give official language status to Nepali in the 3 hill subdivisions of Darjeeling. However, this was rejected by the central government, thus fueling the fire of further discontentment among the Nepalis. The Gorkha National Liberation Front played a very important role in the Gorkhaland movement, and we cannot undermine its role. The fundamental rationale behind the GNLF was expansion of the Nepali citizens from Meghalaya, their protest by the All Assam Students Union over illegal entry of Nepalis from Assam, protest by all Meghalaya Khasi Students Union for deportation of foreigners from Meghalaya, and essentially they were referring to the Nepalis, and refusal of the government of West Bengal and Sikkim to accommodate them. Hence, the Nepalis of Darjeeling took upon themselves to create a separate state for themselves. Subhas Ghising-led GNLF emphasized the demand for a permanent political and administrative safeguard for the Gorkha community. The years that followed during the 80s witnessed violent agitation by the GNLF in recognition of their claims. Ultimately, loss of lives and property made the people crave for peace, and the agitation came to an end with the signing of an agreement between the GNLF and the government of West Bengal for the formation of an autonomous council. It was again a tripartite agreement for the creation of a Darjeeling Gorkha Hill Council signed by the Government of India, the government of West Bengal and the GNLF under the leadership of Subhash Ghising. Now, in order to further the claims for the Gorkhas, another accord was signed, and that was in 2005 between the centre, the West Bengal government and the GNLF, which was called the Memorandum of Settlement. What was the reason for this? To initiate the process of conferment of 6th schedule status to the Gorkha community. Under the 6th schedule status, 6 communities, Bhutias, Lepchas, Sherpas, Yolmos and the newly included Tamangs and Limbus will have greater representation in the proposed Gorkha Hill Council than the 70% of the non-tribal population. The memorandum stated that the objectives of this agreement was to replace the existing Darjeeling Gorkha Hill Council by an autonomous self-governing council to be known as the Gorkha Hill Council Darjeeling under the 6th schedule of the Constitution. However, all these declarations failed to satisfy the Gorkhas. Moreover, malfunctioning of the Hill Council, lack of transparency coupled with undermining of democratic processes and Ghising's apathy towards securing a separate Gorkhaland for the Gorkhas crystallized the demand for Gorkhaland under the new leadership of Bimal Gurung and a new party, the Gorkha Janmukti Morcha. The first move of Bimal Gurung was to turn down the inclusion of Hill Council under the 6th schedule. The 6th schedule according tribal status to Gorkhaland was demeaning since the Gorkhas were mainly caste Hindus and resented homogenization with the scheduled tribes. Since 2008, Gorkhaland movement gathered new momentum and Bimal Gurung adopted a non-violent form of protest by refusing to pay taxes to the government, including electricity and poll bills, changing vehicle numbers from WB to GL signifying Gorkhaland. The new Trinamool Congress government at that point of time kept its promise of an autonomous arrangement short of statehood for the Gorkhas, and a new institutional arrangement was formed called the Gorkhaland Territorial Administration or GTA. Now, GTA was formed as a result of again a tripartite agreement between the central government, the state government and the Gorkha Janmukti Morcha, and this agreement was signed in 2011 for the establishment of this GTA, and the objective was to establish an autonomous self-governing body to administer the region so that the socio-economic, infrastructural, educational, cultural, linguistic aspirations of the Gorkhas are fulfilled. From the beginning, the Act provided for a body which should be established by direct election to root out anti-democratic forces like the DGSC, which was formed out of the State Act, and the BTC, which was a result of the 6th schedule. An interesting observation in this Act is a declaration in which the GJM is not dropping the demand for a separate state of Gorkhaland while signing the GTA agreement. This signals the fact that GTA is only an interim arrangement and Gorkhaland demand may come up any time in the future. The GTA consists of a body of 50 members. Of them, 45 will be elected and 5 will be nominated by the governor to give representation to the SC, ST and minority communities as well as women. The Act does not provide for much legislative powers to the GTA, but confers the powers to frame rules and regulations under the State Act to control, regulate and administer around 59 departments. The administrative, executive and financial powers in respect to transferred subjects will be vested in a manner to enable the GTA to function in an autonomous way. Unlike the Darjeeling Gorkha Hill Council, Gorkhaland Territorial Administration is more powerful in terms of the subjects transferred to it and in terms of the fund allocated by the central and the state government. Now, so far we have understood the dynamics of two governments today, the Bodoland government and the Gorkhaland movement. Now, what can we deduce from these two movements? In both the movements, the center has accommodated the claims of the Bodos and the Gorkhas by recognizing their distinct identity and giving them the right of self-governance within the federal structure in the form of Bodoland Territorial Council and the Gorkhaland Territorial Administration. Now, autonomous territorial arrangements offer mechanisms in India to protect identities and their distinct cultural aspirations. Again, these institutional arrangements also fulfill developmental needs of the region also. It should be noted that identity questions can no longer be isolated from the developmental needs of the people of a region. Thus, autonomous, decentralized, multicultural arrangements provide the institutional space necessary for the ethnic identities to make their own decisions and pursue their own values. Finally, students, please note that in India, crafting a social space for groups and ethnic communities as well as protecting them constitutionally and institutionally is considered to be a prerequisite for a multicultural accommodation, and herein lies the reason behind India's integrity and unity. The significance of these decentralized units should never be undermined because, going by the world-renowned federal scholar who believed that, I quote Ronald Watts, "The desire for smaller self-governing political units has risen from the desire to make governments more responsive to the individual citizen and to give expression to primary group attachments. They are linguistic, cultural ties, religious connection, historical tradition and social practices, which provide the distinctive base for a community's sense of identity and yearning for self-determination." That's all for today. Thank you.